power of being alone. Hello, everyone. Today, I want to talk to you about something that often feels uncomfortable, something that we're not taught to embrace, but something that, if understood, has the potential to change the way we lead, the way we connect, and even the way we live. I want to talk about the power of being alone. Now, when I say alone, I don't mean lonely. Loneliness is a feeling. Being alone is a state, one we can choose, one we can use. See, we live in a world that's constantly connected, notifications, emails, meetings, messages, it's endless. We are taught to equate presence with productivity, noise with meaning, busyness with value. But let me ask you something. When was the last time you sat alone with just your thoughts? Most people avoid it because being alone can feel unsettling. Without the distraction of others, we're left face to face with ourselves. And that's the point, because clarity doesn't come from chaos, it comes from stillness. Think of the great leaders, the thinkers, the creators. They didn't find vision in the middle of a boardroom. They found it in quiet, in solitude, in the long walks, the journal entries, the quiet mornings before the world woke up. And here's the paradox. The more time we spend understanding ourselves in solitude, the better we become at connecting with others. When we hear the word alone, our minds often jump to the idea of loneliness. It's understandable. We're social creatures. We crave connection, belonging, interaction. But there's a subtle and powerful distinction that often goes unnoticed. Being alone is not the same as being lonely. One is a physical state, the other is an emotional one. And if we can learn to see being alone not as something to avoid, but something to embrace, we open up an entirely new way of growing as individuals and leaders. Loneliness is the absence of connection. It's the ache we feel when we're around people, but don't feel understood. It's feeling invisible in a crowded room. It can strike when we least expect it, on a Saturday night during a family dinner, or even while scrolling through hundreds of social media posts. Loneliness is real and it hurts because it reminds us that we are wired to be seen and to matter. But being alone, that's different. Being alone is a choice. It's the decision to spend time with ourselves, not because we've been abandoned or forgotten, but because we recognize the value of that space. And it's in that space, uncluttered by outside voices, free from distractions, that we often hear the clearest voice of all, our own. Most of us are taught from a young age to avoid being alone. We're told to be social, to join in, to fill every silence. We're rarely encouraged to sit by ourselves and reflect. As a result, many of us grow up believing that solitude is something negative, something to escape. But in reality, solitude is where some of the most profound growth happens. When we're alone, we're not performing, we're not reacting, we're simply being. And in those moments, we begin to reconnect with parts of ourselves we might have lost in the noise of everyday life. We remember what we care about. We reflect on who we are, not just what we do. We start asking deeper questions. What drives me? What do I value? Am I living in alignment with what truly matters to me? This is not a call to isolate ourselves or reject connection. Quite the opposite. Embracing solitude actually makes us better at building real, meaningful connections. Because when we come to others, not out of neediness or fear of being alone, but from a place of wholeness and self-awareness, we show up more authentically. We lead with purpose rather than ego. Think of it like recharging a battery. We don't expect our phones to run forever without plugging in, so why do we expect ourselves to stay grounded, focused, and emotionally available without taking time to recharge through solitude? Being alone is that plug-in moment. It's how we recharge our sense of self, our creativity, our clarity. It's in that quiet space that we begin to see that being alone isn't empty. It's full of potential, full of clarity, full of honesty, and maybe most importantly, full of the kind of peace that comes when we no longer fear our own company. We live in a world that worships busyness. Every hour must be filled, every moment accounted for, every day optimized. We rush from meeting to meeting, we multitask, we check our emails while walking, respond to messages while eating, and scroll through endless updates in the few quiet moments we might have. We mistake movement for progress and noise for meaning. But here's the truth most people miss. Clarity, truth, deep clarity doesn't come from all that motion. It comes from stillness. Think about a muddy glass of water. When you keep shaking it, everything stays cloudy. But if you let it sit, even for a little while, the dirt settles. The water clears. Our minds work the same way. When we're constantly in motion, reacting, hustling, grinding, our thinking gets cloudy. We stop being proactive and start being reactive. We lose sight of the bigger picture because we're so busy fighting little fires. Stillness is not inactivity. It's not laziness or indifference. It's the intentional decision to pause. It's the space where we step back and ask, what really matters here? It's not always comfortable, but it's necessary because clarity requires perspective, and perspective is almost impossible to find in the middle of chaos. Most of us don't slow down because we're afraid of what we'll find in the quiet. When the noise dies down, we're left with the voice inside. That voice might be asking hard questions. Am I fulfilled? Am I on the right path? Is this the kind of life I want to build? These aren't questions that can be answered in a conference room or while replying to a dozen emails. These are questions that require us to pause, to listen deeply, and to be honest with ourselves. Some of the most visionary people in history made their most important discoveries or decisions in moments of stillness. Steve Jobs used to go on long walks, not just for exercise, but for thinking. Bill Gates has something called Think Week, where he disconnects from everything to just read and reflect. Leaders who understand the power of stillness don't see it as time away from work. They see it as the real work. Because making space for clarity is what allows us to lead, to create, and to make decisions that actually matter. Without stillness, we end up chasing the wrong things. We follow what's urgent instead of what's important. We confuse productivity with purpose. And the cost of that confusion isn't just burnout, it's misalignment. We start living a life we never actually chose just because we were too busy to stop and ask ourselves if this is what we really want. It takes courage to slow down, to pause when everyone else is racing ahead. But clarity is a competitive advantage. Leaders who take the time to think deeply make better decisions. People who create space for reflection live more intentionally. They speak with conviction, not because they've rehearsed a script, but because they know what they stand for, and you only figure that out when you allow yourself time to sit in the stillness and listen. So the next time you're overwhelmed, the next time you're unsure, or you find yourself lost in the noise, resist the urge to do more. Instead, do less. Sit, breathe, reflect. Let the dirt settle, because only then will you begin to see clearly. And once you see clearly, you'll stop chasing shadows and start walking towards something real. Clarity doesn't scream, it whispers. And if we're always running, we'll never hear it. But in stillness, it speaks. And when it does, it can change everything. Leadership isn't about being the loudest voice in the room or the person with all the answers. It's not about titles or authority or having control. True leadership is about service. It's about creating an environment where people feel safe, inspired, and seen. But here's the part that often gets overlooked. Before we can lead others with authenticity, we first have to know who we are. Self-acknowledge isn't a buzzword, it's a foundation. Without it, leadership becomes performance. We put on masks to please others. We echo expectations instead of speaking from our values. We react instead of responding. But when we truly know ourselves, our values, our fears, our purpose, We stop leading from insecurity and start leading from intention. Knowing who you are doesn't come from a job title or from someone else's opinion of you. It comes from spending time alone. It comes from reflection, from asking yourself the uncomfortable questions and being honest enough to sit with the answers. What drives me? What do I believe in? What kind of impact do I want to make? These are not surface level questions, and they don't have surface level answers. And yet everything we do as leaders is shaped by the way we answer them. If we don't take the time to look inward, we start borrowing identities. We adopt leadership styles we've seen but don't connect with. We mimic instead of lead, but imitation can only go so far before it starts to crack. And when it does, people notice. Because people can sense authenticity. They know when you're speaking from a script and when you're speaking from your heart. The best leaders I've ever met weren't perfect. They didn't pretend to have all the answers. But what they had was a deep understanding of who they were and what they stood for. That kind of self-awareness becomes magnetic. It builds trust. It tells your team, I'm not here to be above you. I'm here to walk with you. And that shift changes everything. Self-knowledge also gives us clarity in decision-making. When challenges arise, and they always do, a leader grounded in self-awareness doesn't need to pause and wonder what the right thing is according to public opinion. They already know what the right thing is. And that kind of clarity is rare, it's powerful, it gives people something to believe in, something to rally behind. But here's the irony. We often avoid the kind of solitude that leads to self-acknowledgement. We fill our calendars and surround ourselves with distractions because sitting alone with our thoughts can be uncomfortable. There's nowhere to hide in silence, but it's in that very discomfort that transformation begins. Because once you know yourself, once you understand what truly matters to you, you stop chasing validation. You stop living for other people's applause, and you start showing up for the right reasons. The people we remember, the ones who truly lead, are not the ones who try to be everything to everyone. They're the ones who were rooted in something deeper. They knew themselves, and because of that, they were able to serve others without ego. They created space for others to grow because they weren't threatened by the success of those around them. They were confident, not in their image, but in their purpose. That's the kind of leadership we need more of. Not louder voices, not busier schedules, but leaders who are willing to do the quiet inner work. Leaders who are willing to sit alone long enough to understand what they really stand for, because once you know who you are, the rest becomes clear, and that clarity is what turns good leaders into great ones. It may sound counterintuitive at first, but the more time we spend alone, truly alone, the better we become at connecting with others. We often assume that connection is built purely through presence, through interaction, through shared experience. And while all of those things matter, none of them are truly meaningful unless we first have a strong connection with ourselves. See, the world teaches us how to be social. It teaches us how to network, how to fit in, how to hold conversations, how to be liked. But it doesn't always teach us how to be whole. It doesn't teach us to look inward before reaching outward. As a result, we sometimes show up in relationships, professional or personal, looking for others to fill gaps we haven't learned to fill ourselves. When we haven't done the inner work, when we haven't spent time in solitude, discovering who we are and what we value, we tend to bring our insecurities into every room we enter. We seek validation from others because we're not sure how to give it to ourselves. We perform instead of connect. We try to be interesting rather than interested. But the truth is, people are drawn to authenticity, and authenticity starts with self-connection. Solitude is the space where we reconnect with ourselves, not the version of us we show to the world, but the one that exists underneath it all, the raw, unfiltered, quiet self. When we sit in that space long enough, we begin to understand what drives us. We begin to see our patterns. We notice what energizes us and what depletes us. We learn to be honest with ourselves, and we become less afraid of our own company. That honesty is powerful because when we become comfortable with who we are in solitude, we stop seeking others to complete us. We start looking for others to walk with us. Our relationships stop being transactional. We no longer connect to impress or to fill a void. We connect to grow, to share, to understand. This shift is subtle, but it's profound. A leader who understands themselves leads with empathy. A partner who knows their own emotions can hold space for someone else's. A friend who is grounded in solitude doesn't get lost in comparison or jealousy. They celebrate others because they're already rooted in their own worth. Solitude teaches us patience. It teaches us how to listen, not just to our own thoughts, but to the people around us. It softens our defensiveness because we're no longer reacting from a place of fear. We've already made peace with our own story. And so we show up to others, not needing to be seen, but ready to see them. We often think the antidote to disconnection is more people, more interaction, more noise, but sometimes the antidote is less, fewer distractions, more stillness, time to reset, time to remember who we are. Only then can we return to others, not half present, not half healed, but whole. Solitude isn't isolation, it's preparation. It's where we practice being present. And that presence becomes the foundation for every meaningful relationship we build. So if you want to connect more deeply with your team, your partner, your friends, your community, start by carving out time to be with yourself. Not with your phone, not with your to-do list, just you. Alone. Listening. We live in a culture that is deeply uncomfortable with silence. The moment things go quiet, we reach for something. Our phones, the TV, a podcast, background music, anything to avoid the stillness. We treat silence like a void, something that signals a lack. But what if silence isn't empty at all? What if silence is sacred? The truth is, we've been conditioned to associate silence with absence of activity, of meaning, of productivity. But silence is not the absence of something, it's the presence of space. And space, when honored, becomes the birthplace of insight, clarity, creativity, and healing in a world that constantly demands more content, more speed, more noise. It takes a certain kind of courage to do less, to pause, to be still. But silence is not a passive state. It's active. It's alive. It's the place where we hear things that are usually drowned out by the chaos of the everyday, like our intuition, our values, our truth. When we embrace silence as something meaningful, we begin to experience a shift. The need to constantly prove, perform, or produce begins to fade. We stop measuring our worth by how much we get done or how visible we are. Instead, we start to listen, not just to the world, but to ourselves. And here's the thing, most of the answers we're looking for are already inside us, but we don't hear them because we're too busy talking, too busy running. Silence gives those answers room to breathe. It offers a kind of internal dialogue that no meeting or feedback session can provide. In the silence, we can ask, am I on the path I want to be on? Am I showing up the way I want to show up? Am I living a life that aligns with what matters to me? These are questions that don't come with easy answers, and they certainly don't come from outside validation. They come from within. And silence is the only way to access them. Some of the world's most powerful ideas were born in quiet moments, on long walks, in early mornings before the world wakes up, in retreats, in reflection, not in the rush, not in the noise, but in the stillness. We often think that breakthrough moments come through intensity, but more often they come through presence. When we embrace silence as sacred, we stop seeing it as time wasted. We stop trying to fill it. Instead, we protect it. We create intentional moments for it in our days. a few quiet minutes in the morning, a walk without our phones, an hour without talking or checking. These aren't just habits for the sake of mindfulness. They're practices that change us. They bring us back to center. And it's not just for our benefit. When we learn to sit comfortably in silence, we also become better listeners. We create space in our conversations, allowing others to feel heard. We stop rushing to respond and we start responding with depth. That's what builds trust. That's what creates connection. The most powerful people I've ever met aren't the ones who dominate the conversation. They're the ones who have a calm presence, a grounded energy that comes from knowing they don't need to speak to be heard. That kind of presence doesn't come from noise. It comes from stillness. So the next time you find yourself in a quiet moment, resist the urge to fill it. Don't see it as empty. See it as sacred. Treat it like a gift, because in that silence, you're not stepping away from your life, you're stepping into it. And in that space, you just might hear something that changes everything.